Welcome back, viewers. I'm Surbhi Unyal. I teach philosophy at Hansraj College, University of Delhi. And we have been doing a series on philosophy of mind. In the previous lectures, we have discussed a general introduction of what is philosophy of mind, what are the primary questions that we deal with in philosophy of mind, and having talked about that, we then move on to talk about one of the most important theories in philosophy of mind, which is the mind-body dualism of Descartes, or the Cartesian mind-body dualism. Moving on with our series, in today's lecture, we are going to talk about the identity theory, which is the identity between the mind and the brain. As we know, or as we had discussed in the previous lectures, there have been a divide in the theorists between what kind of relationship is there between the mind and the body. And the two main theories that came up was the dualism and the physicalism or monism. So dualism and physicalism are two main theories in the philosophy of mind that attempt to explain the relationship between mind and the body. So the primary question that we were trying to deal with in philosophy of mind is whether there is any relationship between mind and the body, whether these are two different substances or whether they are identical. And we saw in the previous lecture that as per the dualists, these two are two different substances or two different entities. So dualism posits that the mind and the body are separate entities, or we can call them as separate substances also. While physicalism argues that mind can be explained entirely in terms of physical processes in the brain. So just doing a quick rewind of what we did in dualism so that we can understand how now these theorists are trying to say that mind can also be reduced to physical processes in the brain. So dualists, they believed or they asserted that there are two kinds of substances in the world, mainly the mental substance and the physical substance. So the mind, according to them, is a non-physical substance that is separate from the body. Dualists believe that the mind is not reducible to the physical processes in the brain, and that it has a special kind of causal power over the body. In other words, mind can cause physical events such as bodily movement without itself being a physical entity. So these dualists, specifically talking about Descartes, he asserted that there are two kinds of substances in the world. One is the mental substance and the other is the physical substance. The mental substance being the mind, he's asserted that it is non-physical substance. That means it is a mental substance which is not extended in the space. So it is non-physical in its characteristic. And that's how it is separate from the body, which is spatially located. It is extended in the space. And we saw various distinctions that has been drawn by Descartes regarding the mind and body dualism. So dualists, they believe that mind is not reducible to the physical processes. So mind being a mental process cannot be reduced to physical process in the brain. And it has a special kind of, even though it cannot be reduced to the physical processes, still there is a causal relationship between mind and the body. And that theory was known as the interactionism, where we saw that there is an interaction that takes place between the mind and the body, or the mental substance and the physical substance. So even while mind being a mental substance and not being a physical process, still it can cause a physical change or a physical event. Just like how if you want to have something, the desire to have something will lead your body to make a movement and really go and get the food that you want to eat. So that kind of, there was this kind of causal relationship between mind and the body. Now, in contrast to this kind of idea between the dualism of mind and body, the physicalists are saying that there is no such division between mind and the body. In fact, mental states can be explained in terms of the physical states. So they are being critical of Descartes' dualism or dualism in general by saying that there is no such division between mind or the mental substance and the physical substance. So physicalism, on the other hand, asserts that all phenomena, including mental phenomena, can be explained entirely in terms of physical processes. According to physicalism, the mind is not a separate substance, but rather a product of physical processes in the brain. In this view, mental states such as thoughts, beliefs, and emotions are nothing more than specific patterns of neural activity in the brain. So physicalists, they argue that there is no need to posit a separate substance or entity to explain the mind, as all mental processes can be reduced to physical processes in the brain. So this is a very important line here, which is in a way summarizing the whole argument which the physicalists are stating, that is, that all mental states can be reduced to physical processes or physical states in the brain. And that's how they are criticizing the mind-body dualism, which has argued that there are two different substances having two different characteristics, and even by being two different and independent substances, they can interact. So physicalists are criticizing that viewpoint and coming up with this theory that everything can be reduced to the physical. And similarly is the case with the mental processes. So mental processes can be reduced to the physical processes in the brain. Talking more generally, this is from the point of view of philosophy of mind, but even more generally, physicalists, how they describe a human being is also from the perspective of being a physical entity. So while describing what is it to be human, what is it to be a human being, dualists would say that a human being is both a mind and a body. So human being is somebody who possesses a body as well as it has a mind. But physicalists are again criticizing this idea, and they are in fact reducing a human being to a physical entity. And they are saying that we can describe a human being from its physical aspects. And being physical, that means it could be a subject matter of science, and science in a way can explain the mind or the person as being a physical entity. So from that aspect, we can see that how there is this divide in philosophy of mind between various philosophers depending on which type of argument or which position they are holding. So one is talking about a division between mind and the body, or the mental substance and the physical substance to be two different substances, while there are these physicalists who are saying that even the mental processes can be reduced and explained in the terms of physical processes in the brain. So now this idea of physicalists, this led to the emergence of the identity theory. So the theory of identity of mind emerged as a response to the unsatisfactory nature of dualism and behaviorism as a means of avoiding dualism. So as I was stating earlier, that dualists, they faced criticism depending on how these mental substances and physical substancing having contradictory properties, how can they interact with each other? So these physicalists, though they are not, the dualists, though they are not able to answer this question, this in fact led to the rise of the identity theory, or identity theory in fact emerged as a response to this unsatisfactory nature of the dualists. So according to dualism, mental states are separate from material states, including brain states. The issue of causal interaction between mental states and material states, particularly causation from mental states to bodily occurrences, is a famous challenge to dualism. So how can something which is mental, how can it lead or how can it cause a physical change or a physical occurrence or a bodily occurrence? Again, talking about how physical events are governed by the physical laws. Being governed by the physical laws means that they are determined. And material substance, since it is not governed by the physical laws, it is not determined. So there is some kind of a tension here that is arising in the dualism. And in order to solve this problem of interactionism, the identity theory was emerged to, in a way, solve and rectify this kind of error which was there in the dualism. So we observe instances of desires and hunger that cause bodily movements, such as arm movements or tightening of the belt. However, the question remains as to how these outside mental states can cause material actions while still adhering to conservation laws in physics and aligning with the principles of neuroscience and other physical sciences. So this is what I was trying to explain, that how could this mental states or how could this mental substance cause this kind of a bodily movement adhering to these physical or laws which are in a way determined or in a way are followed by the determined physical laws. Coming now to the identity theory. So identity theory of mind is a philosophical theory that posits a direct relationship between mental states and brain states. According to this theory, mental states such as beliefs, desires, and sensations, they are identical to the physical brain states. Identity theorists, they argue that every mental state corresponds to a specific physical state of the brain. For example, the mental state of pain is identical to a particular pattern of nerve impulses in the brain. So, these identity theorists, what they are trying to assert is that all these kinds of mental states like beliefs or desires and sensations, they are identical to the physical state or physical brain states that are happening in the brain. And the example that we can state here is that of a case of pain. So a mental state of pain is in a way identical to a particular pattern of nerve impulses in the brain. So thus the mental and the physical aspects of our experience are not separate, but they are actually same. And this is where identity theory comes in contrast with the dualists, who are saying that they are separate. But the identity theorists, they are saying that mental and physical aspects of our experiences are not separate. In fact, they are same or they are identical. So one of the strengths of identity theory of mind is that it provides a straightforward account of the relationship between the mind and the brain. It explains how mental events can have causal power over behavior while remaining fully consistent with the principles of physical causality. And that is where this the law of the physical law which governs the physical processes has been taken up by the identity theorists, which are trying to show that how can there be such a kind of relationship between mind and the brain, where the mental states can have causal power over the behavior, because here the mental states are in fact the physical states or the physical processes in the brain, and hence they are able to causally bring about a physical action, since now mental process has been seen from the point of view of a physical process. And this in a way helps us in understanding the relationship between the mind and the brain, which was earlier being separated by the dualist. So identity theory is in a way successful, or I would say that is how they are trying to explain that mental events can have causal power over behavior, and in fact to an extent that it is consistent with the principles of the physical causality. So this theory aims to bridge the gap between the mind and the brain by asserting that mental states are not fundamentally different from the physical states, and that's how it is able to bridge the gap which was created by Descartes or the dualists. So there was a Cartesian gap between mind and the body, or mind and the brain, or the mental and the physical, where they were seen as two different substances having different qualities, in fact having contradictory properties. So that kind of gap has now been bridged by the identity theorists, who are asserting that mental states, they are not fundamentally different from the physical states. In fact, they are identical to the physical states. Now, having to talk about the identity of mind and brain, we need to first understand what is identity, or what do we mean by the term identity from a philosophical point of view. So in philosophy, identity refers to the unique characteristics or properties that make something what it is and distinguishes it from other things. So the concept of identity is often discussed in various branches of philosophy, including metaphysics, epistemology, and even ethics. That is where we are trying to identify, or that is where we are trying to know that how an object is identical to itself, having unique characteristics or properties that make it to be what it is, and that's what makes it distinguish from the other things. And that's when we say that it is identical to itself, having the unique characteristics or properties which are specific to that object. And this idea of identity has been talked about in metaphysics or epistemology and even ethics. So identity can be understood in different ways depending on the philosophical perspective. For example, in metaphysics, identity is often associated with the idea of persistence over time, which asks what it means for something to remain the same thing over time despite changes in its properties. So one of the most essential idea of identity that is being taken up in the philosophical domain is the idea of persistence. That how do we say that something is identical to itself over a period of time, or how does an object remains to be the same object at different times. This is known as the identity which is associated with the idea of persistence over time. And here the question that we are dealing with is what it means for something to remain the same thing over time despite changes in its properties. And one of the greatest examples that we take here is that of, let's say, a human being. How do we say that this is the same person over time? Consider yourself as a a child and then as an adult? How do we say that you are the same person? Since you have undergone a lot of changes, a lot of bodily changes, even your thoughts have changed over time, but still you persist to be the same person. So there is the idea, or there is the question of identity that is being raised here, that how that person remains to be the same person over time, even when there have been a lot of changes in that person, be it from the point of view of his body, the bodily changes, or the values that you inherit, or the thoughts that you have. They always keep on changing, but still you remain to be the same person. So that is where the concept of identity has been taken up. So the concept of identity presents various philosophical issues, such as the identity of indiscernibles, which questions whether two things sharing all properties are identical, which can be formalized as, if X and Y share all their properties, are they one and the same thing? Which is known as the identity of indiscernibles. According to the identity of indiscernibles, what we are trying to state here is whether two things, X and Y, whether they share all properties, and having being shared all the properties, can we say that they are one and the same thing, or whether they are still different? If we can say that these X and Y, they share all properties, then they are the same thing. This is the question of the identity of indiscernibles that we are trying to raise here. So identity is often discussed in terms of sameness or continuity over time, and we have seen some such examples. The continuity over time means the example that I gave you of a person, that the person is the same even when the person has gone a lot of changes. And there is one more example, which is the ship of Theseus, where we are saying that this ship has undergone a lot of changes, because let's say it got broken and there has to be a lot of maintenance that has to be done in the ship. Still that ship remains to be the same ship. And how do we say that it is the same ship? Or take the case of a person. We say that this person is the same person, even when now from a child he has grown to be an adult and has gone through a lot of bodily changes. Still we say that it is the same person, which is the problem of personal identity, which we deal with in philosophy, which asks what it means for a person to be the same person over time. And this is the question of continuity over time from the point of view of identity. And from the point of view of sameness, we ask this question about whether X and Y, if they share all properties, are they one and the same thing? So these are two ways in which we understand the general idea of identity. And taking this up in the next lecture, we will see that how this idea of identity will help us in understanding the identity between the mind and the brain. So identity of being from the point of view of sameness, or even the point of view of continuity over time. These two ideas of identity, how they will help us in understanding the relationship between mind and brain. So this will be taken up in the next lecture. Please continue with us, and we will take up this issue of identity over mind and the brain.